Albrecht Berblinger was a tailor living in the town of Ulm, Germany, on the Danube River in the early 19th century. He disliked being a tailor, and his lifelong dream was to figure out a way to fly. So he set to work calculating and designing, and by 1811 he had constructed what you and I would call a kind of hang glider. His work was ridiculed by the good citizens of Ulm, and the tailors' union fined him for wasting his time. But he pressed on, and when he was ready to test his invention, he invited the King of Württemberg and the Prince of Bavaria to witness his historic flight. Berblinger perched himself on the wall of a fortress situated on a high cliff far above the Danube River. He started to jump, and then he stopped. He started again, and then he stopped again. Finally, a policeman got tired of waiting and pushed him. And for a moment or so, it appeared that Berblinger was actually flying, but the ice-cold waters of the Danube didn't produce any of the warm-up drafts necessary to keep him aloft, and he plunged into the Danube River. He survived. A fisherman rescued him, but his reputation was in ruins for the rest of his life. 2,000 years ago, there were some magi, astrologers, wise men, whatever you want to call them, who were checking over their charts and gazing into the heavens at night, and they said, we think a new king of the Jews has been born somewhere west of here. We should go check it out. And their fellow magi chuckled. Well, how do you know this star predicts the king's birth? And they said, well, it's our best guess. And they said, well, who is this king? They said, we don't know. They said, well, where was he born? We don't know that either. Well, how will you know that you found him? And they said, well, I guess we'll have to ask the folks hanging around the local Starbucks. Now, for us, with our elegant nativity scene stationed reverently under the Christmas tree, it's easy for us to think of the journey of the Magi as just a pleasant weekend jaunt. They were wise men, weren't they? I mean, they were well-educated men basing their findings on practices that had already been used for centuries, long before Jesus was ever born. How hard could it be? Well, turns out it was pretty tough. As vast as their knowledge was, it still had huge holes in it. Their journey was not guided by a GPS or even a good map. It was filled with twists and turns, trial and error, doubling back, confusing information, and plenty of long, boring days of travel without even a cell phone to relieve the tedium. Now, when you think about it, the Magi's journey is not unlike the journey you and I are facing in 2016. We think we know where we're going, but we really don't. We have a lot of knowledge, but it's never enough. The future is always hidden from our eyes. Our days will see twists and turns, trial and error. We'll have to double back on occasion. We'll get information that'll send us off on wild goose chases, and there'll be plenty of days when we'll wonder, what in the world was I thinking? Because the Magi didn't have all the data they wanted. Their journey was a constant process of adjusting and readjusting to the unfolding information of the heavens. And because you and I never have all the data we want, our journey will be much the same. We want the Magi's journey to be easy because we want our own journey to be easy. But our knowledge is just as incomplete as theirs. A man whose name I have long since forgotten once said to my grandpa Donahue, "Preacher, I don't know much, but what I do know, I know as good as anybody." Now, I've always thought that was a wise, if rather inelegant, statement on the limits of human understanding. We cannot possibly know everything, but we can know some things, and ultimately life comes down to trust. In one of J.D. Salinger's stories, a boy named Buddy Glass is playing marbles on the sidewalk outside his New York brownstone, and just as he is about to make a crucial shot, his brother Seymour stops by and watches him and gives him the best advice a marble shooter could get. Seymour said, "Don't aim. Don't aim." As you and I launch into yet another year, the best advice we can give each other is don't aim. Trust your gut. Apply the knowledge where you can, when you can, but always with the realization that your knowledge and my knowledge will always be incomplete. Whatever journey beckons you this year, don't be afraid to take it. Oh, sure, you'll make wrong turns. You'll have to drop back and punt a few times. Sure, you'll pass the same spot several times and realize you've been traveling in circles, but you know what? So did the Magi. And they eventually got to their destination, with a little help from the guiding hand of God, of course. Instead of worrying about getting it wrong, instead of waiting for a better moment, instead of waiting for more information, just start moving. Because you have to start somewhere. Don't be like Albrecht Berblinger hesitating over the Danube and finally being pushed off. Take the risk. Oh, by the way, as long as I've mentioned Albrecht Berblinger again, you might be interested to know that there is more to his story. As heavier-than-air flight became a reality many years after his death, later generations in the town of Ulm recognized Berblinger as a kind of a pioneer. They even built a museum to display his drawings and his models. And in 1986, a hang glider was constructed according to his plans. And you know what? The fool thing actually flew. It sustained a man in flight just like Berblinger designed it to do. As long as it didn't veer over the cold waters of the Danube River, the contraption flew just fine. So whatever harebrained idea you have for 2016, don't be afraid to try. Don't be afraid to fail. There will always be more to the story than you will ever know. One summer morning, as Ray Blankenship was preparing breakfast in his Andover, Ohio home, he glanced out the window to see a young girl in a rain-flooded ditch being swept along by raging waters. From the way the girl was thrashing about, Blankenship knew that she was going to drown if somebody didn't fish her out before the waters downstream disappeared with a mighty roar underneath the road and then emptied out into the main culvert. So he dashed out the door and he raced along the ditch trying to get ahead of the foundering child, and then he hurled himself into the deep churning water, and when he surfaced he was able to grab the little girl's arm. They tumbled end over end together until they got within 3 feet of that yawning culvert where Ray's free hand felt a rock protruding from the bank, and he grabbed onto it and held on with all of his might while the surging waters tried to tear one hand from the rock and the other hand from the little girl. And he thought to himself, if I could just hang on till help comes. But when the minutes ticked on and his strength was fading, he realized he couldn't wait any longer. And with a Herculean effort, he somehow managed to pull himself over to the bank, pushed the little girl up on the bank to safety, and then hoisted himself out of the ditch. By the time the fire department rescuers arrived, Ray Blankenship and the girl were okay. In shock, but okay. On April 12, 1989, Ray Blankenship was awarded the Coast Guard's Silver Life-Saving Medal. It was appropriate for such a selfless, courageous act. But it's even more astounding when you know the rest of the story. Ray Blankenship can't swim. When you get to the end of 2016, with all its challenges and surprises, what will be the rest of your story?